In the frozen grip of the Old West, winter of 1876 clawed at the isolated cabin in Bitterfrost Hollow, its narrow walls a defiant shield against the howling blizzard. Inside, a sturdy woman with weathered skin and sharp green eyes clutched her Silverbrook rifle. The fire in the stone hearth, her only companion since loss, had sealed her solitude. 3 days of unrelenting storm buried the world in white, but on the third, a colossal shadow lumbered from the void, a towering figure, over 7 feet of raw muscle and matted black hair, staggering toward her door with blood staining the snow. He collapsed mere feet away, his broad frame heaving, deep-set eyes locking on hers in silent plea. Heart-pounding, she gripped the rifle tighter, but survival's raw edge stirred something deeper. Bursting into the gale, numb hands seized the ironwood axe from the shed. One mighty swing shattered the doorframe, crack, splinters flying as isolation cracked like thin ice. Inch by brutal inch, she dragged his impossible weight inside, the wind invading her sanctuary. His fever raged like wildfire, a precise gash revealing horrors unspoken, while distant howls pierced the storm's fury. What shadows hunted them now? Eliza Thorne, 34, stared down at the massive form sprawled across her cabin floor in Bitterfrost Hollow, her calloused hands still trembling from the axe swings that had torn her sanctuary apart. The ironwood axe lay discarded by the splintered doorframe, snow drifting in like uninvited ghosts through the jagged breach. Outside, the blizzard of winter 1876 raged on, a white fury that swallowed the world beyond her narrow wooden walls. Kyle Windrunner, 32, gasped for air, his over 7-foot frame convulsing, broad shoulders heaving against the rough-hewn planks. His long black hair, matted with ice and blood, fanned out like a dark halo, and his deep-set brown eyes flickered with pain that cut deeper than the gash across his chest. She'd seen men die before. Marcus, her husband, felled by fever 2 winters past. But this was different. Kyle's wound wasn't from bullet or blade. It was clean, almost deliberate, like the work of a surgeon's tool amid chaos. Eliza dropped to her knees beside him, the Silverbrook rifle propped against the stone hearth, forgotten for the moment. Her sharp green eyes, framed by dark hair tied back in a practical knot, scanned the injury. Blood seeped steadily, staining her worn apron. "Hold on, stranger," she muttered, her voice steady despite the storm's howl echoing her doubt. Resilient as the frontier had forged her, guarded against the world's cruelties, Eliza felt that deep compassion stir, the kind that had kept her alive through lean years, now pushing her to act. Ripping strips from an old blanket, she pressed them to the wound, but his fever burned hot, skin slick and scorching under her touch. Cale's massive hand clamped onto her wrist, not in threat but desperation. His stoic warrior's grip fueled by honor and a fierce protectiveness that even delirium couldn't erase. "Water," he rasped, voice like gravel under boot heels. Eliza nodded, scrambling to the hearth where a pot simmered over the flames. She ladled boiling water into a tin basin, mixing in snow from the invading drifts to cool it. As she worked, his eyes locked on hers again, pleading, pulling her into a world she'd long shut out. The cabin, once her unyielding fortress, single room, reinforced walls too narrow for memories or men, now felt exposed, the splintered doorframe a gaping wound of its own. Wind whipped through, scattering embers and chilling the air, but Eliza pressed on. She bathed the gash, revealing more, bruises like storm clouds across his carved oak muscles, and a faint tattoo on his arm, Apache symbols twisted by scars from battles past. Who was he? Why here, in this frozen valley far from any trail? Her mind raced, but her hands didn't falter. If you like gripping tales of frontier desperation, hit that like button now. Kyle's breaths came ragged, chest rising and falling like bellows in a forge. Delirium loosened his tongue, words spilling in a mix of English and his native tongue, fragments of horror that clawed at the air. Raiders. Red banners. They came at dawn. Eliza leaned closer, her weathered skin prickling as snowflakes melted on her neck. Crimson Bluff, he continued, eyes unfocused, staring into the flames. Our settlement. Adobe homes in the frozen plains. They marked the paths with those cursed flags, luring us with promises of trade, blankets, beads, lies wrapped in silk. His voice cracked, a warrior's stoicism fracturing. Eliza's heart tightened. She'd heard whispers of such raids, white men preying on native villages, but never this close, never invading her isolation. She adjusted the rags, tying them tighter with leather cord from her sewing kit. The willow tooth amulet caught her eye then, a small child's tooth on a frayed cord, clutched in his other fist. It gleamed faintly in the firelight, innocent and accusing. "The children," Kyle gasped, his protectiveness surging through the fever. "They stole them first. Rounded up the little ones, screaming while we fought. I grabbed the boy, my nephew's son, hid him in the root cellar. But the fire, it spread like vengeance. Visions haunted his mutters, smoke choking the night sky over Crimson Bluff, screams piercing the cold, the cluster of burned-out homes now littered with ash and hidden graves on the surrounding plains. Eliza swallowed hard, her guarded nature warring with the compassion blooming in her chest. She'd built this life alone after Marcus, pushing away the world that had taken him. But here, in the heat of his fever, she saw her own losses mirrored. Innocence stolen, homes reduced to ruin. "You saved him?" she asked softly, dabbing his brow with a cool cloth. Cale's nod was weak, but his eyes sharpened for a moment. 2 days. Kept him safe in the storm's edge, fed him what I could, then sent him toward the river trail. Gave him this. He opened his hand, the amulet rolling onto the floor. The tooth, tiny and white, symbolized not just the boy, but all that was lost. Stolen innocence amid the raiders' greed. Outside, the blizzard peaked, winds howling like the ghosts of Crimson Bluff. Snow piled against the breached wall, sealing the cabin in a cocoon of white, burying any tracks Cale might have left. But then a sound cut through. A distant howl, not wolf, but human, eerie and deliberate. Eliza froze, her hand on the rifle instinctively. Pursuers? The raiders he'd spoken of, tracking him through the hellish 3-day flight? Her pulse quickened, the single room feeling smaller, the stone hearth's warmth a fragile barrier. Kyle's convulsions racked him again, body arching off the floor, his massive frame testing the cabin's limits. She pinned his shoulders down, her sturdy build straining against his power. "Easy," she whispered. "They're not here yet." Hours blurred as she fought the fever. Boiling more water, she brewed willow bark tea from her stores, forcing sips past his cracked lips. His mutters grew frantic. "Burn the markers. The red banners lead them back. They'll come for survivors, for the tooth." The amulet lay on the table now, beside the axe and rifle, a relic drawing shadows. Eliza's mind whirled. What if they found this place? Her isolation, her safety, shattered not just by the door, but by this stranger's war crashing in. Yet she couldn't stop. Compassion had her now, resilient and unyielding. As night deepened, the howls grew closer, weaving through the gale like threads of fate. Eliza barred what remained of the door with a fallen beam, her sharp eyes scanning the darkness beyond the breach. Kyle's chest hitched, breath fluid rattled, his stoic facade crumbling into pleas. The boy. "Tell him I tried." His deep-set eyes faded, locking on hers one last time, a silent bond forming in the fire's glow. She pressed snowpacks to his side, hands numb but determined. The storm's fury matched his decline, wind rattling the walls like bones in a grave. What stalked them from the shadows? Raiders with surgical blades, marking their prey, or something darker born of the Old West's unforgiving heart? Drop a comment below. Would you break your home to save a stranger? Eliza wouldn't yield. Dawn's weak light cracked the horizon, bloody and thin, filtering through the snow-choked opening. Cale's fever clawed deeper, his massive body slick with sweat, muscles taut like bowstrings. She rebound the wound, the precise gash mocking her efforts, too clean for frontier violence, hinting at experiments or rituals in the raider's camp. Whispers of his past surfaced in delirium. Apache raids he'd led in honor, protecting his people from encroaching settlers, now twisted into this desperate flight. The willow-tooth amulet seemed to pulse with the boy's spirit, urging her on. Tension coiled as the howls sharpened, boots crunching snow perhaps a mile out. Or closer, imagination or threat. Eliza loaded the Silverbrook rifle, chambering a round with a metallic click that echoed her resolve. Her guarded heart, once sealed, now beat with fierce protectiveness, mirroring Cale's own. He'd named himself in a lucid gasp, Cale Windrunner, a warrior whose honor had carried him here, to her threshold. The cabin's ruin was just the beginning. Mercy had ignited something unstoppable. She fed the hearth higher, flames dancing shadows across his face. His breaths steadied for a heartbeat, eyes clearing. "You." "Why?" he murmured, voice a rumble. Eliza met his gaze, her green eyes unwavering. Because no one should die alone in this cold. Compassion won, pushing her past isolation. But the howls returned, circling, building pre-climax dread. Were they raiders, drawn by the Red Banners trail, hunting the last witness to their crimes at Crimson Bluff? Kyle's hand found hers again, crushing gently. "Fight with me." The storm broke slightly, revealing glimpses of the valley, frozen plains stretching to hidden graves. Eliza's mind raced. Burn the amulet? Flee at first light? But his decline pulled her back, fever spiking anew. Visions of the raid haunted the air, children torn from mothers, homes ablaze under tattered flags. The tooth gleamed, a hook into vengeance. Hours stretched, her care relentless, fresh rags, more tea, whispers of encouragement. Kyle's stoicism returned in flashes, stories of his life spilling, running with winds across deserts, now frozen in this hollow. As the howls peaked, mere whispers from the tree line, Eliza gripped the rifle tighter. The cabin trembled, not just from wind, but impending collision. Kyle's chest stilled, then hitched back, life flickering like the hearth. Her world had expanded, cracked open by this act of defiance. What reckoning awaited in the thawing dawn? Hit subscribe for the full saga of survival and revenge in the Wild West. The first rays pierced the breach, illuminating the amulet's cord, frayed but unbroken. Eliza Thorne stood taller, her sturdy frame a pillar amid chaos. Cale Windrunner's eyes opened fully, brown depths holding gratitude and fire. "They'll come," he warned, voice gaining strength. She nodded, compassion forging into resolve. The raider's shadows loomed, but so did her rifle, the axe, the tooth, a symbol of innocence demanding justice. Outside, the blizzard's remnants swirled, tracks emerging like veins on the land. Crimson Bluff's ghosts whispered through the wind, urging the tale forward. Eliza bandaged him once more, her calloused hand steady. The warrior's fever broke slightly, enough for him to sit up, his massive form filling the room. "The boy lives," he said, clutching the amulet, because of paths like this. Their eyes met, a pact unspoken, survival then revenge, but the howls closed in, human voices now, coarse and triumphant. Eliza raised the rifle, peering through the splintered frame. Figures in the distance, cloaked in white, red banners faint but visible. The raiders, surgical killers of children and homes. Tension mounted, hearts pounding in rhythm with the storm's dying roar. Cale rose unsteadily, hand on her shoulder, his protectiveness enveloping her. The cabin, once narrow isolation, now a bastion for two. She chambered another round, green eyes fierce. The first shadow broke the tree line, gun glinting. Like, comment and subscribe. Join the ride through the Old West's darkest trails, where one act of defiance ignites a reckoning. The confrontation brewed, wind carrying scents of ash from distant blazes. Eliza's mind flashed to Marcus, to losses buried deep, now unearthed by Kyle's arrival. His wound, that precise cut, perhaps from a raider's experimental blade, testing limits on captives, whispers of black market dealings, stealing native blood for twisted sciences. The amulet burned in Kyle's fist, fueling his rise. For the boy, he growled, stoic honor blazing. She handed him the axe, its ironwood handle familiar in her grip, but heavier in his. Together, they faced the breach, the valley awakening to war. Distant shouts pierced the air, raiders calling, closing the noose. Eliza's compassion had shattered her walls, but it armed her now. Resilient against the tide, the tooth's gleam promised more, a child's survival, a warrior's return, her own rebirth. As the first raider crested the rise, rifle barking into the dawn, the saga ignited. Bullets whined past the frame, splintering wood anew. Kyle swung the axe, a thunderous arc that met the intruder's advance. Eliza fired, her shot true, dropping one in the snow. Chaos erupted, the cabin a fortress reborn. Howls turned to cries, red banners fluttering like dying flags. Through the fray, Kale's strength surged, fever forgotten in battle's heat. He protected her flank, massive frame a shield, while she picked shots with precision born of solitude's lessons. The raiders fell back, but not before one lunged close, blade flashing, surgical and cold. Eliza parried with the rifle's stock, compassion turning to fury. For the children, she echoed, driving him down. The skirmish waned as the sun climbed, bodies staining the white. Kyle collapsed against the wall, wound, reopening, but alive. Eliza bound it swiftly, their bond sealed in blood and snow. The amulet hung around his neck now, a talisman for the road ahead. Crimson Bluff called. Burn the markers, free the stolen, reckon with the shadows. In Bitterfrost Hollow, isolation ended. Eliza Thorne and Kale Windrunner stepped into the light, warriors forged in mercy's fire. The Old West's heart beat on, desperate and unyielding. Eliza's hands shook as she pressed the snow-packed cloth against Kyle's wound, the metallic tang of blood mixing with the sharp bite of the blizzard seeping through the shattered doorframe. The cabin, once her unbreachable shell, now felt exposed, the wind whistling through the jagged gaps like accusatory whispers. Kyle's massive chest heaved unevenly, each breath a ragged pull against the fever that burned through him hotter than the hearth's dying embers. His deep-set brown eyes, usually so steady, flickered with delirium, locking onto hers in fleeting moments of clarity before pain dragged him under again. She boiled water over the fire, the steam rising in fragile curls that did little to warm the chill invading her bones. The Silverbrook rifle lay within arm's reach, its barrel cold and reassuring against the rough-hewn floorboards. Outside, the storm raged on, a white fury that buried the world in silence, broken only by the occasional crack of ice-laden branches snapping under the weight. But those distant howls, faint at first, like wolves on the prowl, gnawed at her resolve. Were they animals driven mad by hunger, or something worse? Raiders, perhaps, their red banners a lure turned to death, as Kale had muttered in his haze. Kale stirred, his broad shoulders shifting against the furs she'd piled beneath him. The willow-tooth amulet dangled from his neck, the small ivory relic catching the firelight like a forbidden secret. "The boy," he rasped, his voice gravelly from disuse, thick with the accent of wind-swept canyons. He fought. Small hands, but fierce. I carried him through the fire line. Eliza leaned closer, her sharp green eyes searching his face, weathered lines etched deeper by suffering. She'd seen men break under less. The isolation of Bitterfrost Hollow had taught her that much. But this warrior, towering even in collapse, clung to purpose like roots to stone. "Tell me more," she urged, her voice steady despite the knot in her gut. Compassion warred with caution. Marcus's ghost lingered in every shadow, reminding her how trust could carve deeper wounds than any blade. She dabbed at the gash on his side, the cut unnaturally clean, edges puckered as if seared by something beyond iron or lead. Not a bullet's tear, not a knife's slash, more like the work of a surgeon's tool, precise and merciless. Kyle winced, his muscular frame tensing, but he pressed on, words tumbling out in fevered bursts. The settlement, Crimson Bluff. They came at dusk, horses like thunder, red cloth snapping from their saddles. Promised trade, beads, cloth, salt. Our people gathered, elders first, then the young ones. His fist clenched around the amulet, knuckles whitening, but it was a trap. Smoke bombs, not fire at first, choked the air, blinded us. They took the children, bundled them like stolen pelts. I saw my sister's boy, eyes wide, reaching back. Eliza's calloused hands paused, the image striking her like a gust through the breach. She'd lost no children of her own, but the frontier had stolen enough innocence from her world. Friends' farms razed, travelers vanished into the snow. She resumed binding the wound with strips torn from an old blanket, her resilient nature pushing back the tide of doubt. The cabin's single room felt smaller with him in it, his presence expanding the space even as it invaded her solitude. Snow drifted in lazy eddies across the threshold, melting into dark pools that threatened the fire. Eliza kicked a log deeper into the hearth, sparks flaring up to chase the encroaching cold. "How many?" she asked, needing the details to ground the horror, to make it real enough to fight. 20, maybe more. Raiders from the east, not soldiers. Mercenaries with strange tools. That cut. He touched the wound gingerly, his long black hair falling across his face like a shroud. One of them tested it on a warrior before me, said it was for study, drawing blood for some white man's potion. They want our strength, our blood, to twist into their own. His stoic facade cracked, honor giving way to raw fury. Eliza's mind reeled. She'd heard whispers in trading posts of shadowy dealings, men in coats peddling elixirs from native lands. But this, children stolen for science, settlements marked for erasure. The Old West's brutality wore many faces, but this one chilled her deeper than the winter of 1876. As the night deepened, Kyle's fever spiked again, convulsions racking his frame. He thrashed, nearly toppling the table where the ironwood axe rested, its blade still flecked with door splinters. Eliza pinned his arms with effort, her sturdy build straining against his power. "Hold on," she whispered, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cold. She forced snow down his throat, melted hastily in the pot, willing the chill to douse the fire within. His protectiveness emerged even in delirium, muttering warnings to shield her, as if she were the vulnerable one. "Stay back." The shadows come. The howls grew bolder, circling closer now, no longer masked by the gale. Eliza snatched the rifle, creeping to the splintered frame. Peering into the swirling white, she saw nothing but endless void. Yet the sounds twisted her nerves. Obstacles piled like the drifts outside. The ruined door offered no barrier. The storm hid any approach, and Cale's condition drained her strength. She couldn't leave him, not with that wound festering, but staying meant facing whatever hunted them. Her guarded heart, so long armored against the world, cracked further. Mercy had invited this chaos, but turning back now would bury her soul deeper than any grave. Hours blurred into a tense vigil. Kyle quieted at last, his breathing shallow but steady, the amulet rising and falling with each inhale. Eliza sat beside him, rifle across her lap, green eyes scanning the dark. Memories surfaced unbidden. Marcus building this cabin plank by plank, his hands steady where hers now trembled. He'd died in a raid much like this. Cattle rustlers, not child thieves, but the echo was the same. Loss had made her isolate, but Cale's arrival forced her to confront it. What if the raiders reached here? Her sanctuary, shattered for a stranger, could become a tomb. Dawn's feeble light filtered through the clouds, painting the valley in muted grays. The storm broke, winds dying to a mournful sigh, revealing tracks half buried in fresh powder. Eliza stepped out cautiously, boots crunching on the crust, axe in one hand, rifle slung over her shoulder. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine and something acrid, smoke carried from afar. Crimson Bluff's ashes, perhaps, or a new blaze. She scanned the tree line, heart pounding. No immediate threat, but the howls from the night lingered in her mind, a promise of pursuit. Back inside, Cale stirred on his own, propping himself up with a groan. His massive form dominated the space, long hair matted, but eyes clearer now. "The fever breaks," he said, voice stronger, though pain etched his features. He touched the bandage, nodding gratitude. Eliza handed him water, watching as he drank deeply. "We can't stay. They'll track me." The blood in the snow, my trail through the passes. His fierce protectiveness surfaced, gaze sweeping her as if assessing threats to her safety. "You risk too much." She shook her head, tying back her dark hair with a leather thong. "I broke the door for a reason. Isolation's no life if it means watching a man die on your step." But doubt crept in. Supplies were low, the cabin's stores meant for one through winter. Journeying to Crimson Bluff meant crossing frozen plains, evading raiders with their surgical blades and red deceptions. Obstacles loomed. The wound could reopen, the cold could claim them both, and those howls suggested numbers against two. Kyle rose unsteadily, testing his legs, broad shoulders rolling to shake off weakness. He retrieved the amulet, holding it to the light. "The boy waits." I promised his mother, burn the markers, end the lies. His stoic resolve ignited something in Eliza, her compassion deepening into alliance. She packed what she could, dried meat, blankets, powder for the rifle. The ironwood axe went to him, its weight suiting his grip better. Together, they fortified the cabin as best they could, barricading the frame with felled branches, masking their scents with ash from the hearth. As they prepared to move, a new sound pierced the quiet. Hoofbeats, distant but deliberate, echoing off the valley walls. Eliza's pulse raced. The raiders, drawn by the storm's end, closing in. Cale's hand found her shoulder, a steadying anchor. "We face them or they claim us," he said, honor blazing in his eyes. She chambered around in the rifle, green gaze fierce. The cabin, once a prison of solitude, now forged them into something unbreakable. Tension coiled like a spring, the path ahead riddled with peril, plains to cross, markers to burn, children to free. But in that moment, with the sun climbing and shadows lengthening, Eliza felt the shift. Her world cracked open, ready to fight back. The hoofbeats grew louder, a rumble building like thunder on the horizon. Eliza and Kyle slipped into the tree line, the amulet glinting as a beacon of unfinished vengeance. Windrunner indeed, he moved with purpose despite the pain, his muscular frame cutting through underbrush like a force of nature. Eliza followed, rifle ready, her resilient spirit armored anew. The valley fell behind, Bitterfrost Hollow, a memory of transformation. Ahead lay Crimson Bluff's ruins, red banners mocking from afar. But they carried the Tooth's promise, survival against the unnatural horrors of men who stole more than land. Obstacles mounted with every step. The snow hid crevasses, forcing cautious probes with the axe. Kyle's wound seeped through the bandage, slowing him, but his protectiveness kept him pushing, shielding her from low branches, scanning for ambushes. Eliza's mind raced with strategies, skirt the main trails, use the ridges for cover. Whispers of the raiders' methods haunted her, their studies. Blood drawn for potions that promised eternal youth or warrior strength, peddled in eastern cities. It twisted the gut, this perversion of the frontier's code. By midday, they crested a rise overlooking the plains. Distant smoke curled from what might be Crimson Bluff, a scar on the white expanse. But closer riders appeared, 3, cloaked in furs, red scraps tied to their saddles. Scouts, perhaps, fanning out. Kyle pulled Eliza down, his body a warm barrier against the cold. "Wait," he breathed. They watched as the riders veered north, missing their trail by scant yards. Relief was short-lived. The encounter sharpened the urgency. Night would bring more, and the cold deepened with the sinking sun. They pressed on, forging a camp in a shallow gulch as dusk fell. Eliza built a small fire, screened by rocks, while Kyle scouted. His return brought grim news, fresh tracks converging on the cabin's direction, raiders circling back. "They'll find the blood," he said, settling beside her. The amulet rested between them, a tangible link to the stolen lives. Conversation flowed haltingly, stories of his people, her losses to the wild. Walls crumbled further, compassion binding them tighter than any rope. But tension simmered. Kyle's fever lingered, sapping his strength. Eliza's hands blistered from the rifle's recoil in practice shots. Supplies dwindled. A storm could strand them. Raiders could outflank. Yet in the fire's glow, resolve hardened. Crimson Bluff wasn't just a destination, it was reckoning. Burn the markers, expose the lies, reclaim the children. As stars pierced the sky, Eliza gripped the rifle, Kyle the axe. The path twisted ahead, fraught with shadows, but they walked it together, the Old West's desperate heart pulsing in their veins. The next dawn brought flurries, light but treacherous, blurring vision. They descended into the plains, the ground undulating like a frozen sea. Kyle's steps faltered once, pain flashing across his face, but he waved off her concern, stoic to the core. Eliza spotted a glint ahead, a discarded red banner, trampled in the snow, its fabric stiff with frost. A warning or a breadcrumb? They skirted it, hearts heavy. Whispers of pursuit dogged them, snaps of twigs, echoes of voices on the wind. Paranoia set in, every shadow a threat. By afternoon, exhaustion clawed at them. They hunkered in a windbreak of boulders, sharing the last of the meat. Kyle traced the amulet's cord, eyes distant. The boy named it Willow, for the tree that bends but doesn't break. Eliza nodded, her guarded nature yielding to empathy. Like us, but obstacles pressed, the wound needed cleaning, infection a silent killer. She used snow and boiled water from a canteen, his grip on her wrist fierce yet gentle. As evening loomed, the plains opened to reveal Crimson Bluff's silhouette. Adobe shells blackened, red flags tattered like wounds. But figures moved there, raiders patrolling, their surgical tools glinting in torchlight. The howls from nights past resolved into human cries, guards or captives. Tension peaked, the air thick with anticipation. Eliza and Kyle exchanged a look, pact sealed. The markers waited to burn, the children to free. Her isolation shattered, his honor ignited. They advanced, weapons drawn, into the heart of the storm reborn. Eliza crouched low behind a jagged outcrop of ice-crusted rock, her breath fogging the chill air as she peered at the ragged outline of Crimson Bluff. The settlement sprawled like a scar across the frozen plains, its adobe huts charred and skeletal under the weak winter sun of 1876. Tattered red banners fluttered from makeshift poles, their crimson hue stark against the white expanse, mocking the desolation. Kyle knelt beside her, his massive frame casting a long shadow, the ironwood axe gripped tightly in his calloused hands. The willow-tooth amulet hung around his neck, a small talisman pulsing with the weight of unfinished promises. His wound throbbed beneath the fresh bandages Eliza had tied that morning, but his deep-set brown eyes burned with unyielding focus. They had come this far through blizzards and shadows, driven by the fevered truths he'd confessed in her cabin. The raiders weren't mere bandits. They were something colder, more calculated, men who preyed on the vulnerable with precision tools that left wounds like the one carving into Kyle's side. Whispers from his delirium painted them as scavengers of the frontier's underbelly, luring Apache families with false signals of trade. then striking with blades that dissected lives as easily as flesh. Children vanished into their grasp, bound for fates unspoken but horrific. Now, those red markers stood as beacons of their deceit, drawing in the desperate only to ensnare them. Eliza's sharp green eyes scanned the perimeter. Figures patrolled the edges, 5, maybe 6, bundled in heavy furs and armed with rifles that glinted dully. Torches sputtered in iron brackets, casting flickering light on crude pens near the central hut, where muffled cries echoed faintly on the wind. Her fingers tightened around the Silverbrook rifle, its familiar weight a steady anchor against the storm of fear churning in her gut. She'd shattered her isolation for this stranger, hauled his towering body through splintered wood and howling gales, and in return he'd cracked open her guarded heart. No turning back now. Cale placed a hand on her shoulder, his touch firm yet gentle, conveying what words couldn't in the brittle silence. They moved as one, slipping from cover to cover, the snow muffling their steps like a conspirator. The first guard rounded a corner too slowly. Eliza's rifle bucked against her shoulder, the crack of the shot swallowed by the vastness. He crumpled without a sound, red blooming on his coat before the snow claimed it. Kyle was already moving, his broad shoulders propelling him forward like a force of nature. He swung the axe in a wide arc, silencing a second raider who emerged from the shadows, the blade biting deep into fur and bone. Alarms shattered the quiet, shouts erupted from the huts, boots pounding the frozen ground, raiders spilled out, their faces twisted in fury under hoods stained with ash. Bullets whined past, splintering ice and rock as Eliza dove behind an overturned wagon. She fired back, her shots deliberate, picking off a man who aimed at Cale's exposed back. The warrior charged through the fray, his height and power turning him into a whirlwind of retribution. One raider lunged with a knife, its edge catching the light like the surgical tools Kyle had described. But Kyle parried with the axe's haft, then drove the head into the man's chest with a grunt that echoed his pain. The air thickened with gunpowder and blood, the red banners whipping wildly as if alive with malice. Eliza reloaded, her calloused hands steady despite the chaos, heart hammering as she spotted a cluster of raiders dragging figures from the central pen. Small figures, children huddled in rags, their eyes wide with terror. Among them, a boy no older than 8 clutched at a guard's arm, his face smeared with dirt but unmistakable. The one Kyle had saved, the owner of the willow tooth. Rage surged through her, hot and unyielding. She broke cover, firing into the group, her bullet grazing a raider's arm and sending him sprawling. Kyle roared, a sound that cut through the din like thunder, drawing their fire. He absorbed a glancing shot to the shoulder, blood seeping through his shirt, but it only fueled his advance. The axe rose and fell, cleaving through weapons and wills alike. 2 raiders flanked him, their blades flashing with that unnatural precision, aiming for joints and vitals as if dissecting a foe. Kyle twisted, his muscular frame coiling like a spring, and brought the axe down on one's leg, the sickening crunch followed by a scream that froze the blood. The other slashed at his wound, reopening the gash, but Eliza's rifle spoke again, dropping the attacker mid-strike. They pushed toward the pens, the children shrinking back as the fight raged. Eliza vaulted a low fence, her sturdy build carrying her over with practiced grace, and fired point-blank at a guard fumbling with a key. The man fell, and she snatched the ring from his belt, her fingers numb but sure. "Stay down," she whispered to the kids, unlocking the gate with trembling haste. They tumbled out, a dozen or more, Apache children with haunted eyes, some clutching makeshift toys carved from bone. The boy, Willow, Cale had named him in story, reached for the amulet around Cale's neck as the warrior staggered up, bloodied but unbroken. More raiders converged, their leader emerging from the largest hut, a wiry man with a scarred face and eyes like chipped flint, a satchel of gleaming instruments slung at his side. "You Apache dog," he snarled, leveling a pistol, "brought your white witch to die with you?" Kale's response was a bellow, charging despite the fire in his veins. The leader fired, the bullet tearing through Kale's arm, but momentum carried him forward. Eliza covered him, her shots forcing the man to dodge, buying precious seconds. The climax erupted in a frenzy of steel and lead. Kale closed the distance, axe swinging in a brutal overhead strike that the leader barely parried with his pistol. Sparks flew, the weapon shattering in the man's grip. He drew a scalpel-like blade, lunging with surgical speed, slicing a shallow cut across Kyle's chest. Pain lanced through the warrior, his vision blurring from blood loss and lingering fever. But honor anchored him. He grabbed the raider's wrist, crushing it with vice-like strength, then head-butted him square in the face, bone cracking under the impact. Eliza arrived then, rifle butt slamming into the leader's side as he reeled. They fought as a unit, her precision complementing his raw power. She disarmed a final raider creeping up behind, kicking his legs out and finishing with a shot to the leg. Non-lethal, for the children needed witnesses, not more ghosts. Kyle dispatched the leader with a final axe blow, the man collapsing in a heap amid the trampled snow, his tools scattering like fallen stars. Panting, they turned to the banners. Kyle, blood streaming from multiple wounds, grabbed a torch from a bracket, his hand shaking but resolute. Eliza helped him, her compassionate core shining through the grime and exhaustion. Together, they touched flame to fabric, the red markers igniting with a whoosh that lit the night. Flames leaped from pole to pole, consuming the lies that had lured so many to ruin. The children watched, some weeping, others reaching out as the fire purified the air. Willow clung to Kale's leg, recognizing the amulet's tooth as his own. A piece of himself returned. The settlement burned, not in vengeful destruction, but in cathartic release. Adobe walls crumbled, ash swirling into the wind like released spirits. No more howls pierced the gale, only the crackle of fire and the soft sobs of the freed. Eliza bandaged Kyle's fresh injuries with strips torn from a raider's coat, her touch steady, her guarded walls forever dismantled. He met her eyes, stoic facade cracking into a rare, grateful smile. "You broke your home for me," he murmured, voice rough as gravel. "I burn theirs for you, and for them." Dawn crept over the plains, painting the smoke-hazed sky in hues of gold and rose. The survivors gathered what they could, blankets, food scraps, the children's small possessions, and began the trek back towards safer lands. Eliza shouldered the rifle, Kale the axe, the willow-tooth amulet now shared between them like a vow. The boy walked hand in hand with others, his steps lighter, the weight of loss eased by rescue. Word of the raid's end would spread through the frontier, a tale of defiance against the shadows that preyed on the weak. Bitterfrost Hollow lay miles behind, its splintered door a symbol of the mercy that had started it all. No longer isolated, Eliza found purpose in the wide world, her resilience intertwined with Kale's honor. They vanished into the thawing horizon, guardians of the innocent, their bond forged in blizzard and blood, a testament to the Old West's unyielding spirit. As weeks turned to months, the winter of 1876 yielded to tentative spring. Crimson Bluff's ruins became a cautionary marker, its red ashes scattered by winds that carried stories far. Kyle's wounds healed slowly, scarred reminders of the fight, but his strength returned under Eliza's care. They settled in a new valley, not as strangers, but as partners, building a life amid the pines where children could play without fear. The Apache families reclaimed their trails, the stolen ones returned to waiting arms, Willow growing tall under watchful eyes. Eliza often thought of that storm-swept night, the colossal shadow at her door. It had shattered her sanctuary, but in its place rose something unbreakable, a family woven from desperation and courage. Kyle, ever the protector, taught the boy to carve willow branches, bending but not breaking, and in quiet evenings by the hearth, their hands would meet, calloused and sure, tracing the paths that had led them here. The frontier's heart, once frozen, now beat warm with hope. Its darkest trails illuminated by the light of one act of mercy that ignited a reckoning for all. The end came not in blaze or bullet, but in the simple rhythm of days unfolding. Raiders' shadows faded into legend, their surgical horrors buried with their bones. Eliza and Cale stood together on a ridge overlooking the plains, the Silverbrook rifle at rest. The ironwood axe hung by the door. The willow-tooth amulet dangled from a post, a guardian spirit for the new cabin. Wider, welcoming, walls built not against the world but with it. In the Old West's vast embrace they found peace, their story etched into the land like veins of gold, enduring through time. If this dying warrior's confession left you breathless, hit like and subscribe for more tales of ancient raids and stolen fates.